Rome in the 3rd century was a city of immense power, but also a city of fear. The Roman Empire stretched across much of the known world, enforcing its authority with legions, laws, and blood. Yet beneath its grandeur lay a growing anxiety: Christianity. What had begun as a small sect within Judea was spreading rapidly, winning converts in the very heart of the empire. To the Roman elite, this new faith was dangerous not only because it rejected the old gods, but because it defied imperial control. In 58 AD, Emperor Valerian launched one of the most brutal persecutions Christians had yet faced. His decree was clear: Christian leaders were to be executed, their wealth seized, and their faith stamped out. The goal was simple: to terrify the faithful into submission. But history would prove that terror often has the opposite effect. Among those marked for death was Lawrence, a deacon of the Church of Rome. Deacons were entrusted with managing the church's resources, caring for the poor, and supporting the clergy. Lawrence was no ordinary figure, known for his devotion, generosity, and quiet strength. He had earned the respect of both the Christian community and those outside it. He was also fiercely loyal to his bishop, Pope Sixtus II, who had been arrested and executed only days earlier. Lawrence had watched as his spiritual father was led away, powerless to intervene, yet determined to carry on the mission they had shared. When Valerian's officials demanded that Lawrence surrender the treasures of the church, they expected gold, silver, and precious relics. Instead, Lawrence requested 3 days to gather the wealth. But rather than collecting coins or jewels, he distributed them to the poor, the widows, the orphans, and the sick. Then, when the Roman prefect returned to claim the riches, Lawrence presented the poor themselves. These, he declared, are the treasures of the church. Such defiance could not go unpunished. To insult Roman authorities so brazenly was an act of rebellion, and the prefect resolved to make Lawrence's death an example. A swift execution would not do. Instead, he was condemned to the most humiliating, agonizing death imaginable. He would be roasted alive, his body placed upon a great iron gridiron set over glowing coals. The spectacle was prepared with care. Public executions in Rome were as much theater as punishment, designed to remind the people of imperial power. The execution ground filled with onlookers, senators, guards, common citizens, and the curious who wanted to see what became of this bold Christian. Some came to jeer, others out of morbid fascination. For the Christians in the crowd, it was a moment of terror and trembling hope. Would Lawrence falter, or would he stand firm? When Lawrence was led out, stripped of his clothing and bound to the iron frame, the air must have filled with a heavy silence. The coals glowed red beneath him, heat radiating upward as soldiers fixed him in place. The smell of smoke mingled with sweat, and the cruel laughter of the Romans rose as the fire began to burn. Flesh against metal, body against flame, the torment was unbearable from the first instant. And yet, Lawrence endured. Accounts tell us that he remained calm, his face unbroken by fear. As the heat seared his skin, he did not cry out in despair, but turned his agony into a final act of defiance. At the height of his suffering, he looked to his executioners and, with shocking composure, mocked them. "Turn me over. I am done on this side." It was an unimaginable statement, one that transformed horror into legend. The crowd gasped, some laughed nervously, unable to comprehend how a man could jest while burning alive. Others were shaken to their core. Here was not a victim, but a victor, meeting torture with a courage that mocked the power of Rome itself. The prefect had sought to humiliate Lawrence, to break him publicly, but the effect was the opposite. His words echoed like a challenge. Rome could scorch his body, but it could not consume his spirit. His faith remained unshaken, even as the flames devoured him. For Christians, it was a sign of divine strength, proof that death itself was powerless against the truth they believed in. As his body weakened, Lawrence is said to have prayed, commending his soul to God. Eventually, the fire overcame even his iron will, and he breathed his last upon the gridiron. But the legend of his final words, half joke, half-proclamation of victory spread far beyond the execution ground. In a time when Christians were meant to be cowed into silence, Lawrence's martyrdom rang like a trumpet. Here was a man who turned the instruments of torture into symbols of faith. The gridiron that roasted him became his emblem, and his name was carried with reverence across the empire. His execution revealed both the cruelty of Rome and the resilience of the Christian spirit. The fire was meant to destroy him, but it immortalized him instead. Lawrence's story became one of the most celebrated martyrdoms in Christian history. Riddled across generations, his mocking words remembered as a triumph over tyranny. The Romans had tried to make an example of him, and they had succeeded, but not in the way they intended. Instead of inspiring fear, Lawrence inspired courage. Instead of silencing Christians, he gave them a hero. His laughter from the flames was more powerful than any decree of the emperor. That day into 58 AD, Rome roasted a man alive on a gridiron. But what they created was a legend. When the embers cooled and the crowd dispersed, the prefect may have believed the church had lost another leader, yet the truth was far different. Lawrence's death did not weaken the Christians of Rome, it strengthened them. The story of his mocking defiance spread quickly, whispered among believers in hidden houses and catacombs, rattled in hushed voices by those who had witnessed it with their own eyes. His courage became a rallying cry. His laughter in the fire proved that even the might of Rome could not conquer faith. For the Romans, executions were calculated acts of terror. Crucifixion, burning, exposure to beasts, all were designed to make subjects tremble at the power of the empire. But Lawrence had shattered that design. Instead of terror, his martyrdom provoked awe. Instead of silence, it sparked stories. The gridiron, intended to be his instrument of humiliation, became his sacred symbol. Christian communities began to venerate Lawrence almost immediately after his death. His body, though horribly burned, was retrieved by believers and buried in Rome. Over time, his tomb became a site of pilgrimage, and churches were built in his honor. The Basilica of San Lorenzo fuori le Mura St. Lawrence, outside the walls, still stands today as a monument to his sacrifice. His relics, like his story, became treasures of the church, not of Rome's empire, but of the faith he served until the end. Legends grew around him. Some claimed that when Lawrence distributed the wealth of the church to the poor, miracles accompanied his actions. Others said that during his roasting, the scent of burning flesh was replaced by a sweet fragrance, a sign that God had sanctified his suffering. Whether fact or embellishment, these tales carried a deeper truth for early Christians. Lawrence was proof that God gave strength even in the most excruciating of deaths. The prefect who had condemned him to the gridiron had hoped to make Lawrence an example of Roman supremacy. Instead, he unwittingly created one of Christianity's greatest martyrs. His very words, "Turn me over, I am done on this side," survived centuries, rattled again and again, echoing as both mockery of his executioners and testimony to his faith. It was humor in the face of horror, courage in the face of cruelty for persecuted Christians. That single moment became unforgettable. By the 4th century, when Christianity gained legal status under Emperor Constantine, Lawrence's memory had already been cemented as legendary. Constantine himself honored Lawrence, building churches to enshrine his legacy. The once despised gridiron became an object of veneration, carried in art and iconography as the tool not of Rome's triumph, but of a martyr's victory. Today, St. Lawrence is often depicted holding a gridiron, the very instrument of his torture turned into a badge of honor. His influence spread far beyond Rome and Spain. Devotion to St. Lawrence flourished so intensely that King Philip II dedicated his great monastery palace, El Escorial, to him. Its floor plan was designed in the shape of a gridiron, a monumental tribute to the martyr roasted alive in defiance of imperial power. Across Europe and later across the world, churches bore his name. Communities invoked his intercession, and his feast day on August 10th became one of the most celebrated in the Christian calendar. But Lawrence's story was not simply a religious legend, it was also a profound political message. His execution revealed the brutality of Roman authority, exposing its reliance on spectacle and cruelty to maintain control. At the same time, his defiance revealed the limits of the control. Rome could torture the body, but it could not break the soul. His mocking humor revealed something terrifying for the empire, that fear itself could be conquered. The psychological impact of Lawrence's death cannot be overstated. For Christians who lived in constant dread of arrest and execution, his example became a source of strength. If Lawrence could laugh while burning, then others could endure imprisonment, ridicule, or even death with courage. He transformed martyrdom from a tragedy into a triumph, showing that the persecuted could seize victory not in survival, but in unyielding faith. This is why Lawrence stands out among the early martyrs. Many were executed, many died with dignity, but few turned their deaths into an act of satire, a challenge hurled at their killers that one line half jest, half proclamation made him unforgettable. It turned the unbearable into the unshakable, even outside religious circles. Lawrence became a symbol of defiance in the face of tyranny. Historians, artists, and writers across centuries revisited his death, fascinated by the blending of horror and humor. To endure roasting alive, with a jest on one's lips, was seen as the ultimate proof of human resilience, the unbreakable will that even fire could not destroy. Yet, behind the legend lies the brutal reality of his suffering. To be roasted alive was one of the most excruciating punishments imaginable. Unlike quick executions, decapitation, or even crucifixion, under certain conditions, roasting prolonged agony, the victim's body cooked slowly, flesh blistering, nerves screaming, lungs filling with smoke. Every second was torment. The fact that Lawrence maintained composure, let alone spoke words remembered for centuries, is both horrifying and astonishing. This is the paradox of martyrdom. From the greatest cruelty emerges the greatest courage. Rome had tried to stamp out Christianity by making examples of its leaders, yet each martyr seemed only to multiply the faith. Lawrence was no exception. His execution, meant to extinguish, became a torch that lit the faith of countless others. Even today, nearly 18 centuries later, his story is retold not only in churches but in classrooms, books, and art galleries. His death continues to provoke awe and disbelief, a reminder of both the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human bravery. St. Lawrence, the deacon who gave the treasures of the church to the poor, the man who mocked his torturers from the flames, remains one of the most enduring figures of Christian history. His name is etched in basilicas, whispered in prayers, and remembered in every depiction of the gridiron that once consumed him. His courage transcended death, transforming torture into testimony. On that day in the 58 AD, Rome sought to silence a voice of faith. Instead, they gave birth to a legend whose laughter in the fire still echoes across time. If this story left you shaken and fascinated, join us again in Torture's Rooms as we uncover more brutal executions, twisted tortures, and the darkest punishments of history. From gridirons to gallows, from iron maidens to breaking wheels, we reveal the grim truths of the past and the courage of those who endured them. Subscribe now to never miss a tale of agony and defiance, because in history's darkest rooms, the flames may die, but the memory burns forever.